TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations. Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. Israel will not permit a threat to emerge near its borders in Syria, and it will utilize all tools at its disposal to prevent such a threat from manifesting. Forces loyal to the de-facto regime in Damascus commit a massacre against hundreds of Alawite and Christian civilians along the Mediterranean coastline of Syria. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announces that Syrian Druze will receive permits to work in Israel. Israel will not permit a threat to emerge near its borders in Syria, and it will utilize all tools at its disposal to prevent such a threat from manifesting. Following a brutal massacre by Syria's jihadist HTS regime in the predominantly Alawite coastal regions of Tartus and Latakia, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar stressed that the self-proclaimed reformation of the jihadist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who've managed to seize control of Damascus, is clearly a lie.
The HTS people mercilessly massacred their fellow countrymen, their citizens. This doesn't surprise those who know about their terrorist past. They were jihadists, and they remain jihadists, in spite of the fact that some of their leaders began to wear suits.
Jerusalem's top diplomat, who visited Europe for meetings with his EU counterparts last week, said further he had warned his European counterparts over the dangers related to the HTS regime, which is rooted in the so-called Islamic State or Daesh, as well as Al-Qaeda.
I told my counterparts, European foreign ministers, that discourse over a transitional government in Syria is artificial. We aren't talking about an elected democratic regime. Rather, we are talking about a group of jihadists that ruled the Idlib enclave and by means of force took over additional territories in Syria, include the capital Damascus. I warned my colleagues against the sweet words of al-Jilani and his people, and I raised the alarm over acts of revenge and violence against the Alawite minority, including their intentions to eliminate the Kurdish autonomy. Over the weekend, our approach proved to be realistic, and to my deep regret, my warnings were precise.
Foreign Minister Sa'ar went on to call upon the international community not to stand idly by while minorities are getting massacred in Syria.
The international community must come to its senses. It must cease granting legitimacy for free to a regime whose first actions include a massacre. It must make its voice heard against the barbaric murder of civilians, against the pure evil of the jihadists. It must reach conclusions of what had happened and to consider new paths to protect the minorities in Syria.
According to reliable sources, over 900 civilians, to predominantly include members of the Alawite sect, were massacred. Moreover, according to a number of reports, several dozen of Christians were also murdered in the jihadist onslaught over the weekend. All in all, the latest figures indicate over 1,400 casualties, to include civilians and armed militias, who also include former members of the Assad regime's military. Meanwhile, at the United Nations,
The Secretary General is alarmed by the violent escalation in the coastal areas of Syria that has seen widespread summary killings, including of entire families, and the loss of at least one of our colleagues from UNRWA. He expresses his sincere condolences to Syrians mourning the loss of loved ones and wishes a speedy recovery for the injured.
The UN Secretary General's spokesman went on to highlight the severity of the situation on the ground, as the forces of the HTS regime of Damascus effectively is enforcing a blockade on the Alawite region.
The escalation of violence we're seeing in Syria has had a severe impact on civilians and civilian infrastructure. As of yesterday, hundreds of people, including women and children and some medical personnel, had reportedly been killed. Thousands have reportedly been displaced in the area, and thousands have crossed into Lebanon to seek safety. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that power outages in Latakia Governorate have disrupted water pumping. Schools in Latakia and Tartus were suspended yesterday and today. The Homs-Latakia highway remains blocked, further limiting humanitarian access. Humanitarian operations in the area remain severely disrupted, with insecurity halting all movements to and within the coastal areas. Civilian infrastructure has been severely impacted, including 6 referral hospitals and several ambulances. Other medical facilities in the area urgently need medical supplies and support.
It is important to highlight that Turkey and Qatar have been working tirelessly to mitigate any impact to their relentless efforts to have HTS, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, under the leadership of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, also referred to as Ahmed al-Shara, to consolidate its power over Syria. Therefore, in a particularly timely maneuver, Damascus informed the Kurdish leadership in northeastern Syria that it agreed to reach an immediate agreement on all matters that were already acceptable to the HTS regime, and that the Kurdish militias would continue to hold onto their weapons for a period of 1 year, during the course of which negotiations on the final agreement would persist. According to a number of TV7 sources, the U.S. Central Command encouraged the Kurdish leadership in Syria to accept the deal. Separately, earlier today, the Qatari mouthpiece Al Jazeera reported that the Druze in the Sweda Governorate had reached an agreement with the Damascus regime. However, the report failed to mention that the Druze group that was invited to Damascus for talks were not part of any leadership, and the leader of the Druze in Syria, namely Sheikh Hikmat el-Hajari, released a statement in which he refuted the attempted ploy to sow disinformation vis-à-vis the predominantly Druze region of southern Syria. It is important to note that the attempt by Qatar to create a picture as if Damascus managed to reach an agreement with the Druze leadership came nearly 2 days after Israel had announced that it would invest 4.9 billion shekels in the Druze community of Israel, and that it would also help the Druze of Syria, who are suffering from dire economic hardships due to the refusal of the Damascus regime to provide humanitarian aid to Syrian regions that are not under their control.
We have a deep commitment to our brothers in the Druze community. This commitment also includes the Druze in the region, especially in Syria. These words reflect the strength of the bond between us and the Druze community. They fight with us shoulder to shoulder. We have a unique covenant that is called a covenant of blood. I say, this is a covenant of blood, but it is also a covenant of life.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who made these remarks during his weekly cabinet meeting on Sunday, continued by highlighting that Druze from Syria will be granted permits to work in Israel.
You justifiably said that our commitment is not only security-related, but also practical, which is led by the defense minister, to bring Druze workers from Syria into the state of Israel. We have needs related to human resources, and you have there in Syria very dedicated people. I think that this illustrates our commitment, as it is also expressed in my conversations with Sheikh Mofak Tarif, and also with the head of the Forum of Druze and Cherkessian Councils Yasser Gadban. And this matter is truly unprecedented and is an indication of what is yet to come.
Meanwhile, overnight, Israel Air Force aircraft conducted aerial strikes against several dozens of targets throughout southern Syria and the vicinity of Damascus. According to corroborated reports, the Israeli strikes effectively destroyed significant stockpiles of munitions, armored vehicles, tanks, detection assets, and relatively advanced radars, which HTS terror operatives and other rogue militias attempted to seize. Moreover, command positions and military sites belonging to the Syrian regime were also struck in Syria. According to the IDF spokesperson's unit, quote, "The presence of these assets in southern Syria posed a threat to the state of Israel and IDF activities. These targets were struck in order to eliminate future threats." Meanwhile, returning to Jerusalem, where Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar stressed that following the massacre, which the Damascus regime committed on the Alawite and Christian communities along the Syrian coastline, essentially proved Israel's decision to capture the border zone and destroy the Assad regime's weaponry as justified.
Our security activity, which the IDF conducts in accordance with the government's instructions, both in the separation zone and the destruction of weapon systems that could have fallen into the hands of the jihadists in Syria, has proven itself as just, correct, important, and with foresight. Today, many more understand this. Israel will not allow the manifestation of a threat to its security along the border with Syria, and it will utilize all tools to prevent it.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. It is important to highlight that TV7 Israel is a non-profit ministry, with all of our productions exclusively reliant on the generosity of viewers just like yourself. Therefore, if you're blessed by the content of our programs, I would like to encourage you, support TV7 Israel with a donation. You can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Separately, I'd like to ask you as ever, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hassan wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and God willing, we'll see you during our next update. Until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.